What is your relationship with your birthday? For many trauma survivors, birthdays are quite complicated. Perhaps you notice that on your birthday, the abusers in your life might pick up on the abuse. And I think that might come from a place of them feeling uncomfortable with someone else taking attention for a whole day. Or perhaps birthdays were wrecked for you when you would notice that the abuser would have these very unrealistic expectations for their birthday. And it didn't matter how hard you worked. Nothing you did was actually going to be good enough for them for that day. Regardless of how that trigger was created, either being your birthday or their birthday, or let's face it, often it's actually both your birthday and theirs. When birthdays get wrecked, it can be so hard to spend that day prioritizing yourself, enjoying yourself, and not being concerned that the shoe's gonna drop at any moment. So my birthday was quite recently. In February, I turned 37 years old, and it was a complicated day for me. And I decided to kick off the second half of season 2 by coming on here to talk about how that birthday went for me, how birthdays have been for me, historically speaking, and what things I have been doing every year on my birthday to continue reclaiming what the narcissists in my life have wrecked. Hi, I am Raysa, a survivor of narcissistic abuse, and I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And you are listening to Hello Trauma Brain, a podcast where I share my experiences living with complex PTSD. My hope is this podcast can help destigmatize mental illness and provide support to anyone diagnosed with C-PTSD who thinks they might have it or has a loved one with this diagnosis. Quick reminder, I am not a licensed psychologist or mental health care professional, and this podcast is not meant to replace nor substitute the care of psychologists, other mental or medical health care professionals. If you think you might have complex PTSD or any of the conditions mentioned in this podcast, please reach out to your primary care or mental health care provider. This episode may reference trauma or abuse, and listener discretion is advised. Remember, you can always pause or skip this episode at any time. And now, let's get back to the episode. Hello, dear survivors, and welcome to this episode of Hello Trauma Brain. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I am officially kicking off the second half of season 2 with this episode. And since the break, Hello Trauma Brain reached the first 500 followers on Instagram. So yeah, I guess a little pat in the back for me. And yeah, that was definitely really cool to see. I will say about the 500. So for a while, I have been kind of like fluctuating between like 497, 498, 499, and almost when it looks like I'm gonna have 500, it goes down again. And it was just like the weirdest few weeks where it just kept going back and forth between 497 and 499. So the first time, and highlight on the first time that I saw the 500 finally come on the account, I took a screenshot of it, I posted it, and I was celebrating. And then I want to say maybe like a day or two later, I was down again to like 490 something, and I felt like such a fraud, and I felt like I was deceiving people. And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody who sees that post is going to check. And now I have 498. What are they going to think of me? And then like, I want to say a week or so afterwards, I officially went over the 500, got even the badge on Instagram, and it's a little bit more official. But basically, all that to say, thank you so much for your support. Thank you for following the podcast. I'm aware that some of you might be new. So to those of you that are new to this podcast, thank you so much for being here. I'm so thrilled to have you. And at the same time, I'm sorry that you need to be here. It's one of those like bittersweet things. And the same goes for those of you who are returning. Welcome back. Thank you so much for your presence here as well. And same goes for you. I am glad you have this content that hopefully is helpful to you. And at the same time, if I had it my way, this podcast would not be needed and I would be podcasting about other things that are more fun. But here we are. So let me give you a quick check-in on how my life has been going. Pretty much for 2025, about 2 months since the hiatus started. So I got discarded by members of my chosen family. So I am an orphan again. That was really painful. It took me by surprise. I knew I was making some changes. I knew I was starting to voice some of my needs. And I was aware that conversations needed to happen. I wasn't expecting this particular person to be like, oh, yeah, like whatever you need, and not have a back and forth. Like, I realized that when I introduce my needs into the table, feelings can be felt about my needs, and maybe they have their needs too that I need to basically take into account and also honor. And I thought that we would be able to come in together and still make it to the other side of this. I was aware and I was expecting it to maybe be a little bit messy, but I really thought this person was going to make it, And they did not. They ended it. I feel like it ended before it started. Yeah, that was really really messy. And at the same time, I will admit, now looking back, it's always clearer when you look back. Does this happen to you? I feel like even though a part of me deep down knows, and I think that is why it took me a while to actually start voicing my needs. Like, this relationship went on for a while with me hiding a lot of stuff that I wasn't comfortable with, and just trying to deal with it on my own. If I look back now, I think that intuition came from knowing that this person wouldn't be able to handle some of these conversations. So let me give you some context and actually say some of the things that I was asking for, because quite frankly, like, asking for what I need is like news to me, and it's not obvious to me, and maybe this is also you. So in case you find this helpful, here are the things that I was asking for. I was asking to practice going first for a little bit, to get used to that, because usually when I go into a conversation with someone, I am very quick to go, how are you doing? And I open up the space for them, and then I'm listening for like a good chunk of the time before it even turns around onto me. I was aware of that pattern. I wanted to practice going first to kind of get a little bit comfortable with that. It wasn't meant to be, I will go first forever. It was a practice exercise. And to give you some context, I asked that out of all the people that I've been talking to, all the people that I have a deep relationship with, basically. And everybody else was able to honor that. And I want to say, like, maybe 2, 3 times I went first. And then I was like, okay, like, can we start alternating now? Because it just feels really uncomfortable to go first, especially every time. Like, something about that just feels like it's not fair. And it's interesting because I don't have an issue with somebody else going first all the time. Or at least I didn't used to have an issue with that. But now I'm starting to realize that that's not very reciprocal. So yeah, that was one of the things I asked for. Another thing that I asked for with this person was to not get unsolicited advice. That is the point where they actually said, I don't want any more feedback. I can't handle it right now. And I feel like that's the moment where I was like, okay, this is going to be tougher than I thought. Still didn't think it would end, but I think at that point I started to get a little bit of a wake up call of like, okay, this might be challenging for both of us, but I think we can do this. So the pattern in this specific relationship was a lot of, I would vent about the stuff going on in my life, or they would vent, and sometimes the details would get a little graphic, and I feel like my nervous system would go on fire when that would be happening, and the other person would be sharing these very graphic, violent details of content they would expose themselves to, and I would feel it on my chest. Like, the anxiety would just creep in. I would feel like an elephant was sitting on my chest. But for a long time, I thought maybe I need to get used to, like, dealing with this, or maybe I need to be tougher, or maybe I am taking on too much and I need to do more inner work to work on that. And like, it didn't occur to me to approach the other person about it until I started doing a deep dive on codependency. And yeah, that's when I started realizing, like, oh, wait a second, like, some of this stuff is actually not good for me. It's also not good for them if I was to do that. And sometimes I would vent too. Like, it went both ways. And essentially the discard was, they sent me a message. They wanted to do repair work over text. And I said, in response, I need some time to think about this. I don't know if that's going to work for me. This week is really hard. Can I get back to you next week? And the plan was to talk to my therapist, kind of get a reality check. Like, am I being unreasonable with feeling like a repair over text is not going to work for me? Or maybe I should accommodate them. Like, what I wanted to workshop what I should do. And I didn't get a chance to. I got a text pretty quickly saying that they did not want to be in a relationship with me. And that was actually right before my birthday too. Not that not that they should have held off on saying how they felt and ending things just based on my birthday. I'm kind of glad in a way that they did it when they did, because it hurt. And also I felt relief that I did not have to keep spending so much effort into this relationship. Because now looking back, I did get a lot of things out of that relationship. That person helped me through a lot. They were present for me during some times I was really struggling. I also was there for them when they were struggling, and that was a really important part of my journey. I learned a lot. And also, things were not reciprocal. Things were getting very intense. And also, I think that the relationship we had and the dynamic we had going on was keeping us stuck in some of the situations that we were in. And when I say this, like, I was also playing a part. Like, this was not just all this person. Like, I also was playing a part into this, and I needed things to change. I felt like that dynamic was useful at some point in my life. But like, as I was doing some really intensive work in myself and reflecting on how I showed up in relationships, I started to realize that some of that stuff was the familiar pattern that I learned before. And even though, quite frankly, had you asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I finally broke out of the pattern and I'm in relationships that are not engaging in that pattern. Now, really taking a good look, I had not broken the pattern. I mean, I changed some things. There were some patterns that were broken, yes, but there were some patterns that were still happening and I didn't realize it. And another thing that hurt about this particular situation was like all the things that I lost alongside with this person. Like, I have a tendency, and I feel like I've been doing this for as long as I've been able to date people. Like, I go into a relationship and I insert myself into the whole system. So like, if it's a person I'm dating or if it's someone that I'm friends with, like, I become a crucial member of their family. And all of a sudden, like, they become my family. And when it ends, I am left not only grieving the person that I am not in relationship anymore, but I'm also grieving the entire family that I took as my own that now I cannot be a part of. And I feel like that part, like that wound, it really hurt to see that wound get reopened, because I've been through that experience so many times with romantic partners and with friends that I've made, and it's brutal. It's really brutal, and I have to take a good look at how I do things from now on. Anyway, that happened. I also had a massive change in my therapy journey. I switched to a new individual therapist, and I've been doing this ditty for years, but in the past year I've switched 3 times. So it's been a thing. And I will say I am proud of myself, because I think I needed to make those changes, and I am proud of myself for recognizing that I needed something different and I did it. I'm not completely proud of how I handled one of those situations, so I need to work on recircling back and wrapping things in a better way with one of the switchovers that I did. And there's the latest one where I did get to really close things in a good enough way. And I'm glad I did that, because I feel like goodbyes for me are so wrecked, and it tends to be this nasty thing, almost like what happened with this discard that I had recently. Like, usually that's my experience of endings. I get a nastygram, and it's either like an obvious nastygram or a nastygram that's like completely marinated and disguised as a quote unquote loving message, but really it's like a guilt trip and is pointing out all these things that are wrong with me. Yeah, ending things is really hard for me, but I'm slowly also experiencing some ways in which endings actually can be a good thing. And it doesn't have to be this big mess where everyone's just hurting like hell at the end and there's no repair. So I had that switch, started new therapy this year with a new person. And so far the fit's great. So I'm really hoping. I'm not gonna lie, my inner kiddo is really, really scared, especially given how many changes we've had recently. And she's still dreading the process of starting all over again and have to say the story one more time and like going through my genogram and explaining who these people are. And like it's exhausting. It's so exhausting. I'm trying to work with her on, when something is not working, we need to make a change. And I will handle that. And there's going to be a process about it. And eventually we'll land somewhere safe. And we no longer value staying somewhere just based on how much effort we've put in. And there's a name for this, is sunken cost fallacy, where when you've put in already like money or time or energy into something and it's starting to show signs that it's not good for you anymore, but because you already spent all these things, you feel like you need to just keep going. And yeah, I'm trying to not act out of that. I'm not trying to act out of, well, we already did it for like a year, might as well just stay here. The time we spent is not lost because we still learned something from it. And I have learned something from all the therapists I've had in my life. The ones that get it, the ones that maybe were not as helpful at the time, like every single one of them, I got something out of that experience. And yeah, I feel pretty okay about my decision, especially now that things are starting to settle and I'm a few sessions in and I'm like, okay, like this actually feels a lot better. So yeah, that happened. Another big change, and I realized that this check-in is a little bit longer than usual, but a lot happened in the last 2 months. I made the very hard decision to step away from the long-term RRP group. For those of you that are new to this modality, RRP stands for Relationship Recovery Process. It's a modality that's been very helpful to me, and I will not talk about the particular details out of respect to the other people that are in this group. But essentially, what happened was the moment arrived where I needed to step away for my own well being. I'm still processing that decision, and I am not swearing off RRP therapy in any way. I do plan to look for another group eventually, but I feel like at this point, I really need to sit with myself, sit with what happened, and take a beat before I jump back in. I feel like at this point, I need some individual intensive work, and I'm going to honor that need. And though it was messy at first, I have had the opportunity to go back to finish the process of what happened. And that felt good. That felt good to be able to say how I really feel and hear how other people felt about it, and to get a genuine apology, a genuine amends. That was new. I usually don't have people apologize in this way when they mess up. And yeah, that was a very healing experience. Like down to the last session, I definitely got so much out of this group. And yeah, I even though I am taking a step back from the group for now, I have still made some really meaningful connections that are not going away. They're still going to be in my life, and I'm glad about that. So before I dive into the episode, I want to talk briefly about one more thing that happened during the hiatus. So I made an investment on a new microphone. This is the microphone. You're hearing me through it right now. It's a Shure MV7 Plus. And apparently the plus is important in the name because there's the MV7, like the original, and then there's the plus, which is what I got. And I'm only making that distinction in case any of you are actually interested. So I'm not giving you the incorrect information. So I got this new microphone in an effort to try to make my process of editing easier. I had a very inexpensive microphone when I started the podcast, and it captured everything down to the pipes in the wall, cats running upstairs, mice swallowing, cars in the distance. I mean, maybe this is exaggerating, but honestly, like I wouldn't be shocked if I was to throw a feather and I could hear it. So sensitive. And the editing was very extensive. Like I was editing a lot of stuff out. Sometimes I would leave some stuff on because I was like, it's good enough, and I was practicing good enough. But I spent a lot of hours editing one episode every week, y'all. And I'm trying to make things a little bit easier for myself. So I made this investment, and I had a whole thing as I was selecting the microphone, as I got the microphone, as I unwrapped it. It's a whole thing. And I basically made a post on Instagram inspired by the new things that I am learning, one of them being a book that I know I've mentioned here before, is The Upside of OCD by Dr. Michael Alsay. So he inspired that post. I do the post. The post actually got a bit of traction, and actually a few days ago, I got an email from Dr. Alsay asking for my consent to see if I was okay with him mentioning my post and mentioning my story in his newest blog. And that was surreal. Like I read it and I was like, oh my gosh, like somebody like broke down step by step what I was doing and how what I did was helpful. Because the whole post is about sharing how C-PTSD and OCD like wreck spine things for me, and what I did to get out of that loop. And maybe this deserves a full episode, but for now, I will link on the show notes the actual post for those of you that want to see a little bit more of what happened, and also the article. And I have to point out, like, it was just the perfect circle moment because he inspired my post and I inspired his blog. So it all came back to square one, and it's a wonderful article. I am just a little blown away. I like my story had that impact. And that's one of the beautiful moments of going on this healing journey and sharing all this stuff. This feels like a full episode already. And I'm realizing how lengthy this check-in is. It might be my lengthiest check-in ever, but I feel like it needed to happen. So we're going to let that be what it is. And thank you so much for your patience. And if you're still here, I appreciate you. Now let's just jump right into this episode about birthdays. So looking back, I actually used to love my birthday. In the moment where I was in the past, it was a day I was looking forward to. I was so excited about it. I was one of those people that was all about tell the restaurant if they sing, I'm gonna be smiling and like enjoying the heck out of it, and I'll enjoy the free dessert. And yeah, I didn't mind being celebrated. I thought I didn't mind being celebrated. And in the past, when I would meet someone, I would try to make a case out of finding out when their birthday was pretty early on, because I would just feel this pressure of like, I don't want to miss their birthday. I don't want to be talking to them or for the week to go by and I didn't say anything because I didn't know it was their birthday. And I was just so scared of that. And I would make a case out of, I'm putting it on my phone. I had it on the calendar and I'm not going to forget. And I usually wouldn't. Like, except for days where like I was too busy and it would just escape me to message. Like I was pretty good at making a case out of messaging that person and sending a voice memo singing them happy birthday. And I was just, yeah, it was a big deal. Looking back now, that Raysa that was so excited and reacting well to everything was fawning Raysa and even making a big deal out of other people's birthday. That was definitely also fawning Raysa. Raysa trying to avoid upsetting someone in any way, including missing their birthday. As I have come to heal and wake up to the reality of my life and how a lot of my behavior was really a trauma response most of the time, I can say that growing up, birthdays were loaded. The expectations were so high. I would see people forcing to be in a good mood on my birthday. If somebody was not in the good mood, like they would go down on that person and like rain like hell, forcing them to not fuck it up for me. And the same thing was expected when somebody else's birthday was there. Like, you know, I was required, I needed to show up, I needed to be in the right, perfect mood, and I needed to bring, you know, all the flashiness. I remember the reaction some of my abusers would have when we were around someone who did not want the singing or did not want the stuff on their birthday. Actually, gosh, I'm realizing a specific person right now in my life. Wow. How did I not realize this before? Okay. Let me give myself a moment. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm just going to say this. A lot of a lot of podcasting is me realizing stuff as I am coming on here. And it just doesn't end, doesn't stop. Wow. I won't say who it is because I'm still not at the point in my life where I'm going to be naming these people in the podcast yet. But gosh. What I will say, in the system, in the abuse system where a lot of my trauma got created, there was another person in that system who we were like pretty much polar opposites of each other. So if I loved birthdays and I loved singing and I loved all this stuff, they actually hated the singing and they hated all that fuss and making it a big deal. Like they did not enjoy that at all. I love getting pictures taken and I would smile in the pictures. They hated the pictures. They absolutely despise when people would force that person to smile in the pictures. And looking back, I wish I would have had the wisdom to honor them more, because I feel like I got on board with the other abusers and would shame them and force them into smiling and doing the thing. And yeah, I want to say like birthdays were very complicated. And that day would be just filled with so much pressure to get it right. And there was no way anyone ever got it right. It would be a thing where like something would always go down and it would feel like the day was ruined. And sometimes like it would kind of like switch a little bit and get saved. But if what went wrong went pretty deep into the day, then the rest of the day was fucked. And it was just, no matter how many good things had happened before, like that one thing happened and it's over now. And I've carried a lot of that. And I feel like some of my behavior, even trying to like not miss other people's birthdays, come from how things would go for me if I forgot someone's birthday, and how they would react and shame me for not remembering or for forgetting or for not getting the right gift. That was also a big thing, like getting the right gift and having a really big reaction when I would get a gift. I also feel like the gifts were marinated in shame. So if I got a gift that was like expensive, I would not finish hearing the end of how expensive it was. It would be like days and days reminding me like, oh, this costs that much and we can't afford it, but we did the sacrifice for you, and a lot of that. And quite frankly, looking back, like I did not want something that expensive to begin with. I was happy with something simple. I really was. Yeah, birthdays were just a day where it was required to go all out, either on mine or somebody else's. And I took that with me into my adult relationships. And even as I think about people that I've been in relationship in the past, I remember some of them being very sulky and very, honestly, looking back, like a lot of notes of vulnerable narcissism. And for those of you who are not familiar with this flavor of narcissism, this is the type where they're very victim-y, like woe is me, nothing ever goes their way and nobody really cares that much about them. And there's a lot of complaining. And basically in the past, when I was in relationship with some of these people that have this presentation, I would notice that as their birthday was coming up, they would start complaining or sharing with me things like, oh yeah, my birthday is coming up, but nobody ever remembers my birthday. And last year nobody texted me, nobody called me. It was my birthday and nobody did anything. And I'm just used to that, because people don't care about me like that. And when I would hear that, I would basically like feel this thing get turned on inside of me saying, well, I'm going to fix it. I'm going to make their next birthday so fucking awesome that they will never forget how great it can be, and they will forget about all the other times. And I'm going to get it right. I'm going to show them how much I care by remembering, not only remembering their birthday, but making such a big deal that they will feel loved by me. And I would work so hard and I would try to basically make their birthday as special as I could make it. And the sulking doesn't end. They might appreciate my efforts at the time, but there was always something that just wasn't right. Like I could remember as much as I could, but the other people didn't. So they're sulking about that. And yeah, that's a very it's a very tall order, and that's a lot of pressure for one person. And now as I heal, that's a red flag. That really is a red flag for me. When I hear someone sulking like that, I've been disengaging quite a bit in the presence of that type of energy. I feel like birthdays have been such a performative and such a huge display for so many years. And honestly, I am yet to meet a trauma survivor who does not have a complicated relationship with their birthday. Like I've attended supergroup meetings where that's the topic. Like I've attended them. I've also led some of those meetings, and I'm making a podcast episode on that right now. So I think it's definitely a thing. And here are some of the reasons I think birthdays are so messy, especially with narcissistic people. And this is my humble opinion. I am not a professional. I am not a researcher myself. in this topic. Like, this is solely based on my experience and the endless amount of hours that I have consumed of this content. I personally think that the reason birthdays are so messy with abusers or narcissistic people is because if it's someone else's birthday, not theirs, that's a day when it is not about them and they cannot handle it. It's really hard for them to put the spotlight on someone else, see it on someone else, not have it be on them, and having anyone else in their radar. Also honoring and making a big deal of that person if they're celebrating their birthday. And I think that presses the shame button for them. They can only keep the mask of pretending to be happy for you for so long. And they cannot last 24 hours of pretending to be happy for someone else, seeing the spotlight on someone else. Heck, probably not even 12 hours. Like, let's assume that you and them are sleeping your 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day. Even just during the time you're awake, they cannot make it to the end of the day without blowing up and snapping right back. I think depending on what type of narcissism they're dealing with, I feel like if they're grandiose, maybe they can really handle, and like doing the big thing can go well as long as it is exactly the way they want it, which is an impossible task, honestly. Like, it's just, yeah, it's a setup for disaster. Doesn't matter which type of narcissism you're dealing with. But I feel like grandiose might be more open to like the big thing. But if you're dealing with like a vulnerable narcissist, you can go all out as much as you want. It's not going to make a dent. They'll seem happy momentarily, but very quickly it turns into, oh, this is wonderful, but so-and-so is not here. See, they don't love me. I knew it. You know, this is always how it goes. And it's just like that focus on everything just being not enough. Yeah, I think any type of special days are just tough, really tough when you're dealing with a narcissistic person. Now, I want to talk about how I've been healing my relationship with my birthday. And I've, at this point, have spent a few birthdays since I've gone no contact. And here is how my birthday has evolved during those recent years. So either the first or maybe even the first few birthdays, especially since I went no contact, that birthday that came right after that, I actually put my phone on airplane mode. I gave a heads up to the very close people in my circle that I was going to be doing this, so they knew that they were not going to hear back from me, and I welcomed their message. And I basically said to them, I'm gonna see it the next day. Like, I'm not going to be receiving anything because I don't want to see a message from the abusers. And it did reduce some of the pressure and some of the anxiety. But quite frankly, there's no winning with this stuff. I feel like it doesn't matter what I do, I tend to lose anyway. I remember when I took the phone out of airplane mode and I saw messages. And at this point, I mean, I have a lot of abusers, but there was one that was blocked, the rest were not. And when I first took a glance, I didn't see any message from any of them, the ones that were not blocked. And it still hurt. Like, I was hurting about it. I was like, oh man, like that. Gosh, I didn't expect it. I didn't expect for it to hurt, but it does. And then I was doing the more careful sweep and actually paying attention. And actually one of them did reach out. And it also hurt. Quite frankly, it made me angry because they acknowledged the boundary. They were like, I know you sent a letter and you don't want to hear from us right now, but it's your birthday. We cannot send anything. So, here it is. Oh, and I was so angry. And I remember sitting with that. Like, I got to experience a chunk of time where I thought I didn't get anything from them and it hurt. And then when I still did, it still hurt. And I remember just realizing that time, something that I've realized many times, which is rarely I get to a scenario where I actually feel like I won. Another thing that I stopped doing is making celebrations, like scheduling things with people on my actual birthday. I now schedule it on a different day because my birthday is so loaded. It still feels so big, and there's so much for me that I have found that I need a lot of solo, like alone time, just me and my inner kiddo, honoring what we need and what we want that day. And in more recent years, I have been honoring more of what I want. And what I've been doing is I plan a day for us, and we'll go out for brunch and have the day to ourselves. And that has felt really good. Another thing that I started doing recently is, and actually I did this for the first time this year, I actually took the day off at work. I usually work on my birthdays. Like, if it falls during the week, I just show up to work. Or if it's in the weekend, back when I was gigging every weekend, I would still be working anyway. And honestly, for many years, like, I think that's the reason I was scheduling stuff anyway, because I was like trying to not make it as special. And I was like, if I have to work, then I have something to distract me and I don't have to sit with how painful this day is. Yeah, this year I was like, I'm gonna actually take the day for myself. And this year it was still a bit messy because the way scheduling worked, I can't talk about the details of this injury here, but I'm recovering from an injury and I was getting the injections for the pain. And the way the schedule worked, that was the day that they had available. So, not gonna lie, it sucked. It sucked. They hurt. They hurt a lot. They're painful when they put them in. I mean, they do help. So there's benefits that come from getting them. But that day, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, yeah, I wish I would have not gotten that on my birthday. But life happened as it did, and I did get to take myself out for brunch before that, so I did get to enjoy a chunk of it, and then the rest of the day was recovering from from the injections, which they quite hurt. Another thing that I am doing is try to lower the expectations as much as possible. So I try, and that's why I don't schedule big things or gatherings with people. It is because I feel like the moment other people come into the equation, my fawning just gets turned on so fast that I forget about myself. And I need to practice being on my own to actually figure out what I actually need and honor it. And sadly, like having people around just is not about them. Like they're not doing anything wrong. It's just my fawning is so automatic that I need a bit of space for that day. And that's okay. I notice also that it's a lot easier for me to celebrate other people than myself. That has been a pattern for me for a long time. And birthdays are not the exception to that. I feel like recently I'm starting at this point to get closer to the 40th birthday. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting closer. I feel like this year for the first time it's starting to hit me that like I'm getting older, I'm aging, and I feel like society wise and in terms of the content that we see out there and a lot of the promotional stuff that gets pushed on us is like how to not age, how to stay younger, how to look younger, how to do all these things to avoid aging like the fucking plague. And I feel like I've been doing a lot of work around honoring the process of getting older. Like that's a privilege. And to be wiser is actually a beautiful thing. Human beings were so fragile. Like not everybody gets to get older. There's a lot of people that didn't live to be my age or past that. And I am starting to feel and see some of the signs of like having a body that's been around for over 3 decades now. And around my birthday, I know I was doing some reflection on like, this can be a beautiful thing. This can be a gift. Like being able to become 1 year older, 1 year wiser, 1 year more healed can be something that's worth celebrating. Actually, it is something that's worth celebrating. Also, becoming more aware of all the times I was so close to not making it to my next birthday. That being my own brain just turning on myself, or some of my abusers. Like I've had a particular abuser who has threatened my life. Honoring the fact that I survived that. I still don't understand how in the heck I made it, but here I am, still alive, sitting with that privilege, with that gift, and taking it in for what it is. And I wouldn't say that I have completely reclaimed my birthday. This year, I still felt the pressure. I still noticed the increase in my anxiety, the increase in my OCD. The pressure was still there. And maybe it will never fully go away. And that's not the point. The point is choosing something different. Another thing that doesn't help is that I happen to share my birthday with a lot of former abusers. And I don't know about you, but I remember all the dates. I tend to. There are some years where I'm like, I don't remember it till like halfway through the day, but at one point or another, it comes up again. And there's a lot of work that I still need to do around that. And I actually had to go back real quick to my journal to see if I dialogue with my inner kiddo on my birthday, because I could have sworn we did. It doesn't look like I did one that day, maybe around it. And I'm gonna have to pin that and do a dialoguing session, because even though it's technically like been a few weeks since our birthday, never too late to do that connection. And I know I did a session in therapy about it. And yeah, birthdays are just fucking messy for childhood trauma survivors, especially. Or people that have been dealing with abusers in their adult life too, honestly. I feel like there's no age limit on this crap. Though I have a lot of work to do to reclaim my birthday fully. I know I did do a lot of talking to my inner kiddo around that day and on that day. Even though the stuff was still coming up, like sitting with it and honoring it and asking my kiddo, what do you need? What do you need right now? It's okay that we feel that way. Of course we feel that way. That's the different thing. That's the new thing. And that is what can start to, little by little, bring progress in my healing. Birthdays are very complicated, and I'm sure that conversation is not over with this episode, and I'm sure next year I'll have more. So for now, oof. Even as I was about to say that, I felt weird about it. I'm gonna try say it in anyway, even if it feels weird. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to little Ricey. I'm so glad that we were born. I'm so glad that we made it to another year in our life. Oof. Even if so many people keep leaving. God, there it is. I am not gonna stop. I am not gonna stop until that little girl feels better in her body and feels loved and is able to enjoy feeling loved. I guess that's my wish, my birthday wish to myself. And that is what I'm hoping I'll be able to give to myself. I'm hoping that I will find more of that this year. And I'm going to share one last thing that I almost forgot. But at this point, I am having a bit of a freak out over how long this episode is turning out to be. I'm trying to just do the thing and say what I need to say. And if for some reason I need to push the schedule or whatever I need to do, I'll do it. But I feel like this is important. So one more thing I want to share is how I have been using birthdays as a way to determine how reciprocal my relationships are. And let me explain a little bit more of what I mean by that. Earlier in the episode, I was mentioning how I make a big deal out of other people's birthdays and I make a case out of having it on my phone so I don't forget, and sending a message and getting a gift or a card or doing something, taking them out for dinner, like something. And in more recent years, I now do something, and I'm glad I'm doing this. I check in with the person, like, what feels good for you? Like, is your birthday something that's triggering, and what would feel good for you in that day? And I listen to what they say and I honor that. That's really important, that when someone tells you what they want and what they need, to actually take it in at face value and honoring it. Something that I started doing in recent years is when my phone is telling me that somebody's birthday is that day, I now have been going back to the messages and I'm paying more attention in terms of what was the last message. And if I see that the last message in our conversation was me saying happy birthday to them last year, and then my birthday came around and they didn't say anything, and I scroll and it's been a few years of this pattern, I'm basically not saying happy birthday anymore. And it's not out of a place of they better remember my birthday every year, but it's more of like I'm trying to determine how reciprocal this is. And quite frankly, I don't know what that looks like sometimes. So the birthday thing has been one thing that has helped me gather some data in that arena. I also look at the amount of messages. Like, basically, if it's been a lot of blue, and for those of you that are iPhone users, that's the blue is usually our messages, right? And if you have an Android, I guess it's green. That's usually how it shows. And if it's a lot of me remembering the occasions and putting a lot of energy, and I don't see the same coming back, I'm taking a step back. And what I'll do is I'll wish them well in my heart. Like, I send them the energy, but I'm like, I'm gonna not say anything this year. I'm gonna see what they do. In a lot of these cases, that has been how the friendship or the relationship or the thing faded away. And that is data in and of itself, right? So this only works if I am the one putting 100% in or 90, 70% in. It doesn't have to be 50-50. Like, I get things happen. My birthday can be dropped. That's okay. And if there were other messages that came after that and the relationship has been reciprocal in other ways, like, I'm not completely, dropping you. Ever since I started doing let me see if they're actually like reciprocating the birthday wishes and letting that determine whether or not I'm going to be putting so much effort into doing that for them, has been quite eye-opening and freeing. So that being said, I think I've said everything I needed to say about birthdays for now. I hope you have found this helpful. If birthdays are complicated for you, I hear you. You're definitely not alone. My wish for you is that you're able to find a way to celebrate yourself and your progress, either on your birthday or not on your birthday. There's a lot that we don't give ourselves credit for. And I think it's important to recognize the growth, the progress that we make as we age, as we continue to get older and we continue living on this planet and navigating all the things that we have to as human beings. And not only as human beings, but also as trauma survivors. In this week's Healing Invitation, I want to offer you a few things to reflect about. How do you feel about your birthday? In an ideal world, how would you prefer to spend that day? Think about the possibility of taking steps to start honoring what you need on your next birthday. No pressure to make any drastic changes. This invitation is more about sitting with the possibility. Perhaps you do some of the things that come up. Maybe you put them on a list for another time. This reflection is more about getting in touch with what feels good for you. Please let me know how this week's healing invitation goes if you choose to accept it. Before we wrap up this episode, all music and production is courtesy of yours truly. Also, I want to share a few ways you can support this podcast. You can subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or the platform you are using to listen. Share this episode with anyone you think could use listening to this podcast. Follow the podcast on Instagram at Hello Trauma Brain. Subscribe to the Hello Trauma Brain YouTube channel and hit the notification bell to be the first to know when I post a new episode. And you can make a donation via PayPal. I want to thank you in advance for your support. A little can go a very long way in helping the podcast reach more survivors that could benefit from finding this content. No worries. All links will be provided in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found this episode helpful. I wish you the best as you reclaim your own birthday. It is time for our farewell affirmations. I invite you to repeat after me. I welcome the belief that I am enough. I am lovable. And I deserve to heal. I wish you a gentle week and thank you for your presence.